Pro et contra.
Earlier today, a lot of headlines were running around in the United States talking about that the CIA had released information allegedly to the Israeli government that within 48 hours, Iran could be striking back against Israel for the bombing of its embassy the day before. Now, as you may recall, the Israelis have just chosen to go after a high value target in Iran that was visiting at the capital city in Syria, and went to their embassy, and Israel chose to strike the target inside the embassy. It was a near unprecedented action that's bound to cause lots of emotion and lots of anger within the Iranian people. And certainly that's the way it's worked out so far. But earlier today, actually just about an hour ago, John Kirby was asked about this report about the CIA. What information did he have? Are we giving to the Israelis about what may be coming?
Did the CIA warn Israel, or did President Biden warn Netanyahu today about an Iranian plan to attack inside Israel within 48 hours?
I'm not going to talk about intelligence matters, Peter. I think you can understand. But they did talk about a very public and very viable, real threat by Iran to Israel's security. And I think I need to leave it at that. It's really as far as I can go.
Now, it's important to understand the context here. Now, this is not just those darn old bad Iranians and they're looking to do their normal thing and they're causing trouble and stirring up difficulty and may come after Israel. This is, if anything comes here, it's exclusively because Israel chose to take out a general officer of the IRGC, the main offensive armed forces of Iran. Not just take him out, but take him out in their embassy, which is regarded by international law as the territory of that country. So on their own territory here. That's important to understand here. And without question, this is going to cause the Iranian side to be very, very angry and filled with lots of emotion. We had this image here from one of the protesters in Tehran yesterday, which I think is pretty symptomatic of what the mood is like in Iran.
دیگه چون اسرائیل حمله مستقیم کرده به عبارت اعلام جنگ کرده دیگه به نظر من دیگه باید اقدام علنی و آشکار باشه اینکه مثلا نیابتی بریم یه جای پایگاهشون رو توی یک کشور دیگه بزنیم به نظر من جواب.
So you see, they're saying, and certainly there's many that are talking about this in the Iranian media. Their proxies are one thing. But now that they're saying, hey, forget about the proxies, it's time to go direct because they came direct to us. Now, it's important to understand how would we feel if this situation happened. The Israelis chose to strike in the embassy. And that, like I said a minute ago, was near unprecedented. Not totally unprecedented, near unprecedented. And that the one exception to that, the only one that I'm aware of, other than the accidental strike of the U.S. against the Chinese embassy, for which we apologize profusely. Other than that accidental, the only other intentional attack on an embassy that I'm aware of is in 1998 Nairobi, when two embassies in Africa of the United States were struck by Al Qaeda. And this caused, tremendous damage, large loss of life. I think 200 some odd were killed, 5,000 wounded, most of them from Africa. But it was a big, big issue to the United States. And President Clinton went before the American people to explain what had happened on that day.
These acts of terrorist violence are abhorrent. They are inhuman. We will use all the means at our disposal to bring those responsible to justice, no matter what or how long it takes.
Now, really, you wouldn't be surprised if any nation had that view. And you can dislike Iran until the cows come home. You can find 100 things that are wrong with them. You don't like their form of government. They're repressive. They kill their own people. All that's true. But that's not even relevant to the discussion here. The question that we want to ascertain is what may come next and what impact on American national security might that have? And that is very much important and what we want to focus on in this deep dive today. So it didn't take very long. In fact, it took 2 weeks for the United States to find out who had done this and then find out where they were and take action. And Clinton again came to the American people.
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan because of the imminent threat they presented to our national security. The most recent terrorist events are fresh in our memory. 2 weeks ago, 12 Americans and nearly 300 Kenyans and Tanzanians lost their lives, and another 5,000 were wounded when our embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam were bombed. There is convincing information from our intelligence community that the bin Laden terrorist network was responsible for these bombings.
Now, I include that there not just to show that that's what a country does when it takes resolute action when its embassy has been struck, but also to point out that's not where the story ended. It didn't end with they hit our embassy and then we turned around and hit them hard, and that's where the story ended. That was August of 1998. I think we all know what happened a few years later in September of 2001, where that same group continued to operate here. Just bombing somebody is not going to cow them into submission. It's not going to drop them out. So whatever Iran does next is not going to make Israel back down. And obviously, Israel had already not backed down based on what had happened before. Almost surely, this is going to continue to ratchet up and to continue to escalate as each side keeps hitting each other back. Everybody needs to be clear. There is not going to be an end to this. If we continue this escalatory retaliation cycle, then this is going to continue to go on for a lot longer, and the chances of it escalating beyond just those two will grow also. We need to be clear on that. But first of all, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's take a look at what are some of the possibilities that Iran may choose to do now, because they have to be very careful that they have a measured response, because what they want to do is that they want to make good on their the attack that happened to them. They want to retaliate against it. They want to stand up for their national dignity, all the things that any nation would want to do. But they also have to be careful. Unlike the United States, especially back in the 1998 edition, there was really no limit to what we could do. The Taliban group, they were not a national power. They didn't have the ability to project power and come after us. They couldn't launch missiles. They couldn't do any of those kinds of things. So we were really almost unlimited in anything that we wanted to do to them there. And we didn't have to worry too much about a kinetic, strong counterstrike, because they just didn't have the capacity to do that, being a terrorist group. Iran doesn't have that luxury. They have to calculate very carefully what they do, because Israel most assuredly does have the ability to strike back and strike back hard. So they want to try to do enough to satisfy their own people and to also try and put a deterrence on Israel, because they don't want Israel to feel like they have the freedom to act. And that's what they have been. I don't know if you're aware of this. It hasn't gotten a lot of news in the Western media. But since this war broke out, there's been a number of times Israel has just attacked and taken out of temporary operation the airport in Damascus, the one in Aleppo, and a couple of different times, different airfields in there, because they claim that's where Iran was bringing supplies in that were helping Hezbollah, et cetera. So that's been going on. There's been an assassination campaign going on inside Lebanon, inside Syria. They continue to take out high-value targets. On the 28th of March, there was a pretty large strike in Aleppo that killed 40 Syrian troops and a number of other people as well. And then, of course, came the big one when they took out the embassy. And so this has been ratcheting up, and many on the Iranian side has been complaining to their leadership, saying we haven't been hitting back hard enough. And that's why Israel feels the freedom to continue doing this. So now some of the pressure seems to be building on the mullahs that they have to do something. So I expect they're going to try and thread the needle, but they can't go too low, or truly Israel is going to continue to feel freedom to do this, and it almost certainly will go in. So what are the options then? Number one, they could go big, and they could say, okay, tit for tat. You took out our embassy, we're going to take out one of your embassy. And there's already reports in the Israeli media today that all of their embassies worldwide are on heightened alert because they're afraid of exactly that very thing happening. It could also be some other Israeli facility, some other thing in worldwide. It could be a high value target. It could be a prominent business, for example. It could be a prominent person. They may also assassinate an Israeli leader, an Israeli politician, someone famous, some Jewish famous person. It could be anywhere in the world. And of course, we know that Iran has a number of tentacles that can reach all over the place. That's their network of spies and contacts all over the world, especially throughout the Middle East, is something that they're well known for. So really the target list is quite large, and it kind of goes up and down the escalation scale. So we're not really sure where that might be. But it's going to be something. Now, I think it's probably going to be on the higher end, maybe not the highest end. I don't know that they would go after an embassy because that would surely spark a retaliation. But I think that it will be maybe some facility, because I honestly, I think for their own sake, I don't think that they can do something on the smaller range of that and still placate their people. Now, the one possible exception to that might be something we heard Dan DePetris talk about yesterday is a non-kinetic response, which could be even more alarming. And that is they could make the decision to build a nuclear weapon. And as you probably have heard many times in the news, in congressional testimony and elsewhere over the last number of months, anytime it talks about the Iranian breakout capacity, they say based on the amount of material that they have and the additional centrifuges they've gotten since we left the JCPOA, the nuclear deal in May of 2018, now that they could be as little as a week away from building enough fissile material for a bomb, and possibly within 2 to 6 months to actually produce the first nuclear warhead. That's, of course, if we know when they make the decision. We may not. Some of these things may be able to do on the sly without knowing, or it may take some time for the IAEA inspectors, the UN inspectors, to be able to pick up and identify some of this stuff. So there's going to be a lag time there. And that could be one of the biggest dangers, that the very thing that we claim that we wanted to avoid this whole time, they're actually coerced into, out of feeling like that's the only thing they can do to defend themselves is to get into a bomb. And then, of course, all bets are off, and you have this whole different and an escalated problem, because I can assure you there will be a great many in the United States who will enthusiastically say, now we have to strike Iran. We have to use kinetic means. We can't let them have a bomb. Every president, I think, going all the way back to Clinton, have said that Iran will never have a bomb. Trump said it the other day when he was directly asked. Biden always says it. Every American president says that same thing. And so now then they're going to be in a position to where somebody may have to make good on that, or we may have to come up with something else. But so that is maybe even bigger than if Iran chooses to strike an Israeli embassy, for example. But let's not get ahead of ourselves there either. These are some of the possibilities right now. I doubt we'll have to wait too long. Now, this alleged CIA warning said potentially within 48 hours, which would be 12 to 24 from now. We'll have to wait and see how that happens too. I've talked to some other knowledgeable people here in Washington, D.C. who have some connections in the intelligence community. Both of them independently tell me that most people are leaning toward the night of 8 or 9 April, which coincides with the end of Ramadan. Who knows? They may also choose a different night altogether so that it's not predictable, that nobody knows when it's coming. That's usually how these things work best, when the target doesn't know what's happening. But all of that leads to the next question is, what is in America's interest? How does all this affect the United States, and what role should we play in this? Now, Jack Keane says that we should basically be able to do whatever we want because, well, Iran's not going to do anything anyway. Watch what he says.
A lot of talk and wringing of hands that this could escalate into World War III. That is not going to happen. Iran does not want a direct confrontation with the United States and go to war with the United States. All of their objectives in the Middle East that they're trying to achieve, domination and control, are gone because they lose their regime.
Well, it's just gone. So it's easy for Jack Keane. They won't do it because, well, they would be gone. But would they? Would they be gone? Let's kind of take a look at what's going on, because a lot of people, when they talk in these big sweeping comments like this, they don't get into the nitty gritty, how things work on the ground. and what the reality is on the ground. And man, have we heard a lot of that over the last couple of decades of people saying how easy something would be. And then all of a sudden we get sucked in like Gulliver and then trapped down and lose lots of troops and end up losing the war. So there's a lot of bad precedents on that too. And I think that there's a lot of room for that here too. Let's take a look at some of that. So that's, you heard Jack Keane, General Jack Keane, who's saying how easy things are. There's another general in Israel, a retired general, who has a very different view. And his name is Major General Itzhak Brick, a retired general. And he says, in this current situation, I see an unprecedentedly serious situation. Those who decided to attack such an important target in Syria, which included 5 generals who all have replacement, leads us to many possible Iranian responses, one of which may be an all-out regional war in the Middle East. The state of Israel is not ready for it. Israel is not completely prepared. The ground forces are small and unable to fight on several fronts. And what are some of those fronts he may be talking about? So right now, you obviously have the Israeli Defense Forces heavily engaged throughout the Gaza Strip. They are in the southern part right now and preparing probably to go into Rafah. But they're also conducting operations throughout the remainder of the Strip because nothing has been fully pacified. Even though we're nearing the 6-month mark, still the place hasn't been pacified in the areas that they've cleared. That should be a note that that's probably going to be the case indefinitely, by the way, but I'll talk about that part in another time. But that's the primary form of operation right now. Well, they're also in a low-level skirmish on the north with Hezbollah in Lebanon. They've been having these cross-border skirmishes back and forth almost throughout the entire time. There's been various concerns that maybe the Hezbollah will launch an attack and open up a 2-front war against Israel. That's unclear. That's unlikely. I don't think that they would spark that because it's not in their interest to do so right now. And it's unclear whether they have the capacity to attack into Israel. Now, defend against Israel is a separate issue. And there has been actually more talk on the Israeli side among some of their generals. And I'm talking public here. We're not talking about any kind of secret information that some of them are musing about going north. And in fact, one of the possibilities is that when Netanyahu says he wants to finish the job in the south in Rafah, that's so that they can get the rest of the main fighting off there so that they can turn to the north. But if they're still in the south, and now then there is a northern front opened up from Hezbollah, then you've got some real problems. And then if on top of that, then you actually get into some kind of a conflict with Iran, it is very unclear, very unlikely that Israel is going to be able to fight an effective war against throughout the Strip. The chaos that they may have even more uprisings in the West Bank, the Hezbollah in the Lebanon area, and then Iran, and then you can throw in there potentially continued mess down in the Yemenis and the Houthis down in that area right there. You've got all of these proxy groups that are all over, especially Iraq and Syria, and really throughout the region there, that could also be escalated. There's this so-called axis of resistance that Iran's a part of, and we can't rule out the possibility that even Syria could join that, which is also a part of that. So if this thing goes sideways for Israel, and it can, they could be in a real world of hurt. Now, of course, that's going to raise the specter of them possibly using their nuclear weapons. And now then you have an even bigger potential mess. So the United States could get sucked into this. And in fact, there is some plausible evidence that Israel wants to get the United States into this, because it looks like, just again, analyzing that, not what anyone's saying, but what things are doing, what Israel's doing on the ground, how they're conducting operations, is that they would like to draw Iran into this, because there is some suggestion that they want to get rid of their Palestinian problem. They want to get rid of their Hezbollah problem in Lebanon, and they want to get rid of their Iranian problem up in that direction here too. So they want to get all of that done all at one time while they've got this going on. If they back off now, if they finish one thing, then they'll have that one. And there's this mentality that says maybe they want to get a whole regional war so that they can finally win once and for all. Now, if anyone has that mad thought, let me just explain some things to you. This is the reality. That's nonsense. And it's more than nonsense. That's far too tame of a word. That's insanity. Because Israel is a relatively small army, like General Brick said. And the even for the United States Army, Iran is much bigger than Iraq was. And you saw we had like 186,000 troops at the height of that one to try and actually pacify that country here. Iran does have a especially fast boat navy, so they can do some damage, especially in the Straits of Hormuz. They can interdict oil shipping there. They can string the thing up with mines. They can completely jack up a Western, actually global energy supplies just for everybody for a long period of time. They also have very powerful and very accurate ballistic missile systems, precision guided munitions. They have a lot of them. They're not Iraq. They're not not Lebanon. They're not Libya, where Gaddafi was. This is not somebody that you can take out and they can't do anything in return. Iran is basically a middling power that is relatively weak. And in terms of national power, they have significant limitations, especially in ground forces and air forces. But they do have some capacity in the water, and they do have capacity in the missile forces and in the air defense forces. And it would be foolish to take nearly the only strength they have and require them to use it, and then to try to go into a war into their strengths where they will have all the advantages, because they're not going to attack. And like roll tanks and airplanes and whatever else, they're not going to launch an attack into Israel, because Keen's right on that point. They don't want a war. They're certainly not going to attack into the United States. Hezbollah, it looks like so far, they've been for nearly a half year now, they have resisted attacking into that, because they also don't want to attack, because it's a lot harder to attack than it is to defend. But if they are attacked, Iran has a lot of ability to defend, and I'm sure that they've been paying a lot of attention to what both Ukraine and Russia has been doing on the defense in their areas, and they know how to make a very painful defense for anyone who wants to come against it. Hezbollah, the same thing. While they're not good on the offense, they have a well-prepared defensive area, and if anyone attacks into that, they're going to run into a buzzsaw. And there is no reason for any of this. America does not need to be in anybody's war anywhere. Israel doesn't need to be in any war here. They need to get their war off the table. It's in everyone's interest, America's interest, Israel's interest, the regional interest, certainly the people in Palestine. All the peoples that live in all these countries, the best thing for everybody is to get the war over. So we should be putting so much more effort into diplomacy, into finding a way to get these fights off the charts, off the table, and then spend the decades that it would take to tamp things down further, to keep them tamped down, and to work on getting some stability. It's going to be incredibly hard right now. It always is in the Middle East under the best of conditions. And this is nearly the worst of conditions. Nearly. The worst conditions would be if we break out into a regional wide war. So it can get worse from that. But right now, we're not there. Right now, we still have the capacity to get this thing under control. And we need to, whether that's through coercion and putting pressure on our friends in Israel, whether that's cutting off their arms supply until they do something that makes sense, that also works in our interest. Whatever it takes, we need to get this war off the table in Hezbollah, in Hamas, because the longer it goes, the greater the chances of this thing escalating. Now, this all assumes that there's another big explosion doesn't happen when Iran retaliates, and so that's why even my plan right now is kind of on hold, because we have to wait and hold our breath to see what happens next, and just pray that the leaders, and that means Biden and Netanyahu primarily, don't overreact themselves, whatever Iran does after that. It is, listen to me carefully. It is in America's vital national interest to prevent war from breaking out in the Middle East, and especially to getting sucked into one. It is 100% loss, and there is zero gain. There's none whatsoever. We would lose troops. We would lose material. Our force would be weaker. We're already weakened because of all the ammunition and the precision-guided munitions that we've given to Ukraine and to Israel. And if we had to suddenly start using them in large numbers for our own defense, we wouldn't have them very long. You've already seen from some of these shows we've done recently, the resupply rates and the recovery rates to even rebuild what we've already given away and lost is already measured in years, multiple years. That's right now. We wouldn't have enough capacity in our storage and then in rebuilding capacity to regenerate more supplies to sustain a war anywhere. And God help us if anything goes south in the Russia-Ukraine war, or if there's an explosion in the Indo-Pacific between China and Taiwan that could possibly get us sucked in there. You see the point. Our armed forces are not near as strong as what people think. They are not invincible. They are subject to logistics. They are subject to supply constraints and storage capacity, despite what some people may think, like Jack Keane, who seems to think everything's easy. Nothing is easy here. And it's so important that we get this right here. It is in America's interest to get the war over. And that is your deep dive for today. Appreciate you paying attention and coming and watching our show today, folks. We're unintimidated and uncompromised, and we're going to keep giving you the truth, even when it gets ugly. And if it gets more ugly, you can count on us giving you the truth and telling you, even in those cases like that, there's still off-ramps. And there are today. And I'm going to keep telling you where the off-ramps are so that we can avoid getting into any kind of destructive wars that are not in anybody's interest here. Join us tomorrow. We're actually going to have a really special treat. A friend of mine from Africa actually is from Uganda. Has some amazing stories of diplomacy, of peacekeeping, and also helping refugees on the ground there. It's an amazing story, which includes some near-death moments, though. So you're not going to want to miss that at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Join us here on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Thank you for watching, like and subscribe.